At Thanksgiving dinner, my daughter-in-law left a card on the table. Family trip, clean the house before we're back. Even the nanny went along. I simply smiled. When they returned and their keys didn't work in the door, my daughter-in-law fainted. I'm glad you're here. Like this story, share it, and tell me where you're listening from so I can see how far my story has reached. 2 weeks. It had been precisely 2 weeks since we laid Frederick to rest, and here we were, gathered in Mr. Davies's somber conference room. The air was thick with unspoken expectations, the kind that always accompany the reading of a will. I sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, my gaze sweeping over the faces assembled. Distant cousins, some I hadn't seen in years, others I barely recognized, all united by the singular magnet of inheritance. On my right sat my son, Ethan, a man who once possessed a vibrant spirit but now seemed perpetually overshadowed. Next to him, my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, exuded an almost predatory elegance. Her carefully sculpted blonde hair framed a face that was undeniably beautiful, yet utterly devoid of warmth. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped an impatient rhythm against the tabletop, a sound that grated on my nerves like chalk on a blackboard. Ethan, my dear son, was a shadow of his former self. His shoulders slumped, his eyes cast down, only occasionally darting towards Vanessa, as if seeking her silent approval for simply existing. It pained me to see him like this, to witness the man he had become under her influence. He looked perpetually tired, a dim echo of the bright, ambitious boy I had raised. Mr. Davies, Frederick's longtime attorney and a man who had seen our family through countless milestones, cleared his throat. He was a picture of professional gravitas, his silver hair neatly combed, his spectacles perched on his nose. He held a thick legal document, Frederick's last will and testament, bound in a heavy blue cover. A hush fell over the room, broken only by the incessant clicking of Vanessa's nails. She finally stopped, leaning forward, her eyes bright with a covetous glint. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Davies began, his voice calm and steady. "We are here today for the reading of the last will and testament of Frederick Hayes." He recited the opening formalities, the standard legal jargon that laid out the document's validity and the deceased's sound mind. My mind, however, drifted back to Frederick, to his kind smile, his booming laugh, his unwavering love. It felt sacrilegious to be discussing money so soon after his passing, yet here we were. Suddenly, Vanessa's sharp voice cut through the solemn atmosphere. "Yes, yes. We understand all that, Mr. Davies," she interjected, waving a dismissive hand. Her impatience was palpable, her disdain for formality thinly veiled. "Could we please get to the important part? The fortune?" Her gaze swept around the room, settling on me for a fraction of a second, a smirk playing on her lips. She made no secret of her expectations, of her belief that Frederick's wealth was her due. She then leaned back, a smug expression on her face. "Ethan and I have big plans, you know," she declared, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's been a long time coming. We fully intend to live off his fortune, as is only right." The casualness with which she spoke, as if Frederick's entire legacy was merely a means to fund her lavish lifestyle, twisted a knot in my stomach. There was no mention of Frederick's memory, no respect for the man who had built this very fortune, only a blatant declaration of intent to consume it. She had always been like this, a parasite feeding on the goodwill and efforts of others, utterly devoid of genuine affection or gratitude. She had chipped away at Frederick's joy, had systematically eroded my relationship with my son, and now she stood ready to plunder his memory. Internally, I was screaming. Every fiber of my being wanted to rise, to unleash years of pent-up anger and frustration at this woman who had systematically poisoned my life and my son's. But I had learned, over decades of enduring Vanessa's calculated cruelty, that direct confrontation was her preferred battleground. She thrived on drama, on making others look foolish. Instead, I forced my features into a neutral mask, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. I would not give her the satisfaction. "Not today." Mr. Davies paused, his expression unreadable, then continued. As per the wishes outlined in Frederick's will, the primary residence located at 14 Oakwood Lane, including all furnishings and fixtures, is to be divided equally between his son, Ethan Hayes, and his wife, Eleanor Hayes. Vanessa's self-satisfied smile faltered. Her eyes, which had been alight with anticipation, narrowed. A beat of silence stretched, taut and uncomfortable. Then, she snapped. "Excuse me," she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Did you say divided equally?" She looked from Mr. Davies to me, her disbelief morphing into thinly veiled rage. Why would Eleanor need half of such a large house at her age? She's 62. For goodness sake. It's ridiculous. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face flushing crimson. He glanced at me, then quickly away, clearly mortified but utterly incapable of intervening. Vanessa, oblivious to his discomfort or perhaps simply not caring, pressed on. "We are a young couple with a future ahead of us. We need that house. It's about our future, Mr. Davies. Not some sentimental attachment to an old place." Her words were like daggers, each one aimed at my heart, designed to diminish my worth, my place, my very existence. The idea that a home Frederick and I had built, filled with decades of memories, was simply an old place with no sentimental attachment, was an insult of the highest order. I took a deep, steadying breath. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. With a quiet strength that surprised even myself, I rose from my chair. My movements were slow, deliberate. From my handbag, I retrieved a thick, cream-colored envelope, sealed with a wax impression of Frederick's family crest. It felt heavy in my hand, imbued with the weight of its contents. I placed it gently on the table in front of Mr. Davies, my gaze meeting his. His eyes, usually so serious, held a spark of something knowing. "Mr. Davies," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried clearly through the suddenly silent room. "Could you please read this aloud?" Mr. Davies picked up the envelope, turning it over in his hands. His brow furrowed for a moment. Then a slow, knowing smile spread across his face. He recognized it. "Ah, yes," he murmured, his voice gaining a touch of warmth. "A properly witnessed codicil. Excellent." He broke the seal, the crisp sound echoing in the stillness, and began to unfold the document within. The sound of the wax seal breaking, a crisp tear in the silence, jolted me. Mr. Davies was preparing to read the codicil, and a quiet sense of triumph began to blossom within me. But as he adjusted his spectacles, my mind, almost against my will, drifted back 15 years to the beginning. To a time when the roots of this very moment were subtly, insidiously planted. Vanessa, when she first entered our lives, was a vision of charm. She swept into Ethan's world and, by extension, ours, with a dazzling smile and an aura of effortless sophistication. I remember our first family dinner after they'd started dating. She had sat at our antique dining table, admiring the heirloom silverware and complimenting my pot roast with such genuine enthusiasm. I instantly warmed to her. "Eleanor, this is absolutely divine," she'd exclaimed, her eyes wide. "You must teach me your secrets. Ethan never stops raving about your cooking." She would listen intently as Frederick recounted anecdotes from his youth, occasionally interjecting with a well-placed, appreciative laugh. She seemed genuinely interested in our family stories, asking questions about my past, about how Frederick and I met. She was everything a mother-in-law could wish for. Beautiful, intelligent, and seemingly eager to integrate into our family. The first faint tremor, the first almost imperceptible crack in that flawless facade, came when we started planning their engagement party. I, naturally, offered to help, brimming with ideas for caterers, decorations, and a guest list that included all our cherished friends and relatives. "Oh, that's so sweet of you, Eleanor," Vanessa had said, her tone honey-sweet, but her eyes held a different glint. "But we really want to make it our style, you know. Something fresh, modern. We've already booked a venue and a planner, It's all taken care of. Her smile was still there, but it felt a little too tight, a little too rehearsed. My suggestions, my excitement, were quietly, politely, yet firmly dismissed. It was a subtle rejection, cloaked in deference, but it stung nonetheless. That pattern continued through the wedding planning. I offered to help choose the flowers, recalling Frederick's preference for white lilies. "Darling," Vanessa had demurred, a sigh escaping her lips. "We're going for a more rustic, wild look. Think sunflowers and wildflowers." My menu suggestions, the photographer I had known for years, even the small family traditions I'd hoped to weave into the ceremony, all met with the same sweet, yet unyielding, dismissal. Each gentle refusal was accompanied by a reassuring pat on my hand, or a, "Don't you worry your pretty head, Eleanor," that only served to infantilize my role. By the time the wedding day arrived, I found myself relegated to a mere spectator, watching my son marry, but feeling strangely disconnected from the very event I had once dreamed of. The joy was there, yes, but it was tinged with an odd sense of exclusion. The real campaign of subtle erosion, however, truly began after Ethan and Vanessa moved into their first home. Frederick, ever the generous father, had helped them significantly with the down payment. Delighted to see his son establish himself, he saw it as an investment in their future, a foundation for a happy family life. But for Vanessa, it seemed to be a launching pad for a different kind of independence. An independence from us. Initially, our weekly family dinners were a sacred tradition. Every Sunday, our home would fill with the comforting aromas of my cooking and the lively chatter of family. After they moved, these dinners gradually became monthly, then sporadic. "Oh, we'd love to, Eleanor, but we're just swamped this weekend," Vanessa would say over the phone, her voice always sounding a little rushed. "Ethan has a big project, and I'm so busy with my new client." The excuses were always plausible, always professional, always just vague enough to prevent any real challenge. Soon, calls for dinner were met with sighs, or a quick "we'll see," which invariably meant no. Our family gatherings, once the heartbeat of our week, faded into rare, carefully choreographed appearances. The worst part, the part that truly pierced my heart, was the arrival of my grandchildren, Chloe and Leo. My deepest joy was clouded by Vanessa's gatekeeping. I remember Chloe's first steps. I saw a grainy video sent by a cousin, 2 days after it happened, only for Vanessa to later casually mention, "Oh, didn't we tell you? She walked on Tuesday. Ethan called you, didn't he?" Similar patterns emerged with Leo's first words, his first tooth, the countless small, precious milestones that define early childhood. I was always the last to know, always feeling as though I was peering into their lives through a smudged window, an outsider looking in. When I would gently confront Ethan, he would stammer, "We thought we called. Vanessa said she mentioned it." The truth was, they hadn't, or if they had, it was in such a fleeting, dismissive way that it was impossible to register. Over time, I learned to decipher Vanessa's language. Her sweet tone often masked concealed irritation. "You look lovely, Eleanor, for your age," she'd remark, a backhanded compliment that pricked at my self-esteem. Or, when I offered advice based on years of experience, "Oh, how charmingly old-fashioned, Eleanor. But we're doing things differently now." It was always delivered with a smile, a slight tilt of her head, making it difficult to pinpoint the malice. Yet the malice was undeniably there, an invisible thread weaving itself through our interactions. It was a slow, agonizing realization, but I eventually understood. I was being systematically, methodically carved out of my family's life, not with harsh words or open conflict, but with 1,000 small exclusions, 1,000 polite refusals, 1,000 sweet-toned dismissals. I was becoming an inconvenient relic, an obstacle to be bypassed, a memory to be gently faded. The pain of it was a constant ache, a quiet despair that settled deep in my bones. Frederick saw it too, though he tried to reassure me at first. "Young couples, Eleanor, they need their independence," he'd say, his hand gently patting mine as I confided my worries. "They're building their own nest." But even he, with his boundless optimism, began to sense something deeper, something more insidious at play. He watched Vanessa with a quiet intensity, his brow furrowed, a flicker of concern in his eyes. He would simply hold me closer sometimes, offering silent comfort, knowing that words couldn't always mend the wounds inflicted by such subtle betrayals. He understood that this wasn't just about independence. It was about control, about a deliberate wedge being driven into the heart of our family. Mr. Davies still held the codicil, preparing to read, but my mind refused to return to the present. The subtle erosion had deepened, becoming a deliberate isolation. My grandchildren, Chloe and Leo, were growing up, and my attempts to connect with them were like trying to catch smoke. I would suggest a trip to the park, an afternoon baking cookies, or a simple playdate, only to be met with Vanessa's familiar, sugary excuses. "Oh, Eleanor, that sounds lovely, but Chloe has ballet, and Leo has soccer practice, and then we have a playdate with the Millers." The calendar, it seemed, was always miraculously full for me, yet always open for others. Frederick, bless his heart, couldn't stand by idly. He tried to intervene, gently at first. He'd call Ethan, asking why the children didn't visit their grandparents more often. "Son, your mother misses the little ones," he'd say, his voice kind but firm. "It's important for them to know their grandparents." But Ethan, once so open and communicative, had become distant, anxious. During the rare visits we did manage to arrange, he'd seem restless, constantly checking his phone, his eyes darting towards the door, as if expecting Vanessa to appear and disapprove. The joy of having them near was always tainted by his palpable discomfort, his unspoken fear of Vanessa's reaction. The breaking point arrived with Chloe's 8th birthday party. I had spent weeks picking out the perfect gift, a beautiful hardcover book about constellations, knowing her fascination with the night sky. I imagined her delight, her bright eyes, but when I called to confirm, Vanessa's voice, sharp and dismissive, sliced through my excitement. "Oh, Eleanor, it's just a small gathering, really," she'd said, an edge to her tone that was impossible to ignore. "Just close family. We won't be needing you there." Close family. The words reverberated in my mind, stinging like an open wound. Was I not close family? Was I not Chloe's grandmother? When I relayed this to Ethan, his usual evasiveness evaporated, replaced by a strained frustration. "Vanessa thinks you don't really connect with the kids, Mom," he mumbled, avoiding my gaze. "She says you make them uncomfortable." The words were a physical blow. Me? Make my own grandchildren uncomfortable? I, who had dedicated my life to nurturing, to loving? It was a calculated cruelty, designed to sever the last vestiges of my hope. That night, I cried myself to sleep, a raw, primal grief for the family I was losing. Frederick held me, his arms a comforting fortress. He didn't try to console me with platitudes. Instead, his voice was grim, laced with a chilling realization. "She's isolating him, Eleanor," he whispered, stroking my hair. Classic manipulation. He was right. The isolation extended beyond the children. Christmas, once a vibrant celebration at our home, became a quiet affair for just Frederick and me. Mother's Days passed with a perfunctory card, if that, while Vanessa's social media feeds proudly displayed pictures of perfect family brunches with her own mother, a woman who lived in a different state but seemingly commanded more attention than I, who lived only 30 minutes away. I watched from the sidelines, a silent, heartbroken observer, as my grandchildren grew up, likely thinking their grandmother was distant, uninterested, and uninvolved. My presence, my love, was being systematically erased from their narrative. But Frederick was not one to be easily defeated, nor was he blind. While I wrestled with my grief and anger, he began to act, quietly, methodically. He started documenting everything. He had always been a meticulous man, but now it took on a new, urgent purpose. He kept a small, leather-bound journal, hidden away in his study. In it, he meticulously recorded every ignored phone call, every declined invitation, every significant event, birthdays, school plays, holidays, that we only learned about after the fact, usually through a chance encounter or a social media post from a distant relative. He noted the dates, the circumstances, Vanessa's excuses, and Ethan's evasions. He was building a case, not for a court of law, but for a truth that he knew, one day, would need to be revealed. Someday, someone needs to know the truth, Eleanor. He'd tell me. His voice low, his jaw set. He would show me entries, his careful handwriting detailing the slights that had become our daily bread. He wasn't seeking revenge, not exactly. He was seeking justice, a restoration of the narrative that Vanessa had so skillfully distorted. He wanted to ensure that when the time came, our side of the story, the true story of her calculated cruelty, would not be dismissed. The final, decisive blow to Frederick's own heart came on his 70th birthday. We had managed to coax Ethan, Vanessa, and the children to a quiet dinner at our favorite restaurant. Frederick, despite everything, was radiating joy, eager to spend time with his family. But Vanessa spent the entire evening glued to her phone, scrolling through social media, occasionally offering a lukewarm, distracted comment. She picked at her food, barely engaged in conversation, and managed to cut the celebration short by announcing, just as the waiter brought out Frederick's small birthday cake, that the children had an early morning and they simply had to leave. As they were gathering their coats, I saw it. I saw Vanessa lean down to Chloe, her lips barely moving, a cruel, almost imperceptible whisper. Chloe, innocent and trusting, nodded solemnly. I couldn't hear the words, but the look on Vanessa's face, a smug satisfaction, told me everything I needed to know. Later, Ethan, flustered and apologetic, confirmed my fears. Vanessa said. She just told Chloe, "Poor Grandpa. Doesn't realize how exhausting these family things are." That whisper, that casual dismissal of Frederick's joy, of his very presence, solidified his resolve. It was no longer about just me. It was about his grandchildren, about protecting his legacy, about ensuring that Vanessa's toxic influence would not consume everything he held dear. He closed the door to his study that night, and I knew he was adding another entry to his journal, an entry that would seal Vanessa's fate. The silence in the conference room was suffocating. Mr. Davies, with a slow, deliberate movement, adjusted his glasses, his eyes now fixed directly on Vanessa. Her triumphant smirk had vanished, replaced by a flicker of unease. He unfolded the codicil I had given him, its crisp pages a stark contrast to the heavy will he had just laid aside. He cleared his throat, and the air crackled with anticipation. "This document, Mr. Davies began, his voice resonating with an unexpected firmness, is a properly executed codicil to Frederick Hayes's last will and testament. It was prepared just 3 months ago and witnessed by myself and 2 independent parties." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled relatives, before returning to Vanessa. "It addresses," he continued, emphasizing each word, "specific concerns regarding the character and conduct of certain beneficiaries, and provides additional directives regarding the distribution of his estate." Vanessa's carefully constructed mask, which had held firm for years, finally began to slip. Her eyes widened, her perfectly painted lips parting slightly. "What?" she blurted out, the single word sharp with dawning apprehension. "What does that mean?" Mr. Davies's reply was dry, almost clinical. "Frederick never mentioned documenting anything to you, Mrs. Hayes. It wasn't a question, but a statement, heavy with implication." He then turned his attention back to the codicil, his voice softening slightly as he read the opening lines. "To my beloved wife, Eleanor, who has endured 15 years of systematic emotional abuse and manipulation, a testament to her strength and resilience. My heart, which had been beating a nervous rhythm against my ribs, suddenly hammered in my chest. Systematic emotional abuse and manipulation. Frederick knew. He truly knew. A tremor ran through me. It wasn't just the journal entries, the quiet documentation of slights. He had been recording things, actual conversations. The realization sent a jolt of both dread and vindication through me. Mr. Davies looked up from the document, his eyes meeting mine for a moment, a flicker of something akin to admiration in their depth. He then reached into his briefcase and produced a small, sleek digital device, no bigger than a car key fob. Its presence felt profoundly unsettling in the staid legal setting. It was Frederick's explicit instruction, he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, that these recordings be played for all beneficiaries present, as they provide necessary context and insight into his decisions. Ethan, who had been sitting hunched in his chair, suddenly straightened, confusion clouding his features. Dad was recording conversations? He interjected, his voice hoarse with disbelief. That doesn't sound like him. He wouldn't. He trailed off, looking from the device to Mr. Davies, then to me, searching for an explanation. Mr. Davies pressed a button on the device. A small red light blinked. Frederick Hayes was a methodical man, Ethan. He replied calmly, his gaze steady. He believed in truth. And in justice. He then motioned towards a discreet speaker built into the conference room table, a feature I had never noticed before. A faint hiss of static filled the room, then a voice, unmistakably Vanessa's, filled the air. It was from 3 months prior, only a few weeks before Frederick's passing. Her tone was sharp, dripping with condescension. Honestly, Eleanor, it's getting a little pathetic, isn't it? Vanessa's voice echoed, loud and clear, in the suddenly too quiet room. Those endless stories of yours are just boring. Chloe finds you embarrassing, you know. And Leo? He explicitly said he didn't want to visit the old house again. My breath hitched. The words were a fresh stab, even though I had known the sentiment. But to hear them, raw and unfiltered, was different. It confirmed the malicious intent behind her actions, the deliberate planting of falsehoods in the children's minds. I knew, with absolute certainty, that Chloe and Leo had never said such things. They were sweet, innocent children, and Vanessa was twisting their words, twisting their affections, for her own cruel purposes. The recording continued, Vanessa's voice gaining momentum, a venomous edge hardening her tone. Frankly, Ethan and I have discussed it. We think it's best if visits are limited to, say, major holidays, and even then, perhaps only for a few hours. It's for the best. You weren't exactly very good as a parent, were you, Eleanor? Always so clingy. Ethan made a small, choked sound. Nola, he said, his voice barely a whisper. That's harsh. But Vanessa, in the recording, was merciless. Harsh? No, Ethan, it's realism, her recorded voice shot back, laced with contempt. And speaking of harsh, your own lack of backbone is a direct result of her smothering, isn't it? She raised you to be a pushover, incapable of standing up for yourself. It's no wonder you struggle to make decisions without her looming influence. It's frankly pathetic. My son flinched, as if physically struck, his face paling. He looked utterly humiliated, trapped between the scathing voice of his wife and the stunned gazes of his relatives. Vanessa's voice continued, a relentless assault. She's a clingy, needy woman, Ethan. She wants to insert herself into our happy marriage because her own life is so empty and pathetic. She clings to you, clings to the children, because she has nothing else. It's a sad, desperate attempt to fill the void of her own failed existence. Is life. The words hung in the air, each one a calculated dagger. They were not just insults, they were an unraveling of my entire life, a dismissal of my love, my role as a mother, as a wife. A profound silence descended upon the room, broken only by the faint whirring of the small digital device. Mr. Davies, without a word, pressed a button, and the recording stopped abruptly. Vanessa sat utterly motionless, her eyes fixed on the device, her face ashen. Her carefully constructed facade had not just slipped, it had shattered into 1,000 pieces, revealing the ugliness beneath. The room was filled with the stunned, silent gazes of everyone present, all directed at her. If you're finding yourself gripped by this story, don't miss a single moment. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to keep up with the revelations. Every detail matters. And trust me, There's a lot more to uncover. The stunned silence that followed the first recording shattered as Vanessa sprang to life. Her face, still pale, contorted into a mask of indignation. "This is illegal!" she shrieked, her voice high-pitched and raw. "You can't just record people without their consent." She glared at Mr. Davies, then at me, her eyes burning with a desperate fury. Mr. Davies, however, remained utterly unfazed. He slowly removed his spectacles, polishing them with a deliberate calmness that only seemed to fuel Vanessa's rising hysteria. "Mrs. Hayes," he stated, his voice even and controlled, "we are in a one-party consent state. Frederick was legally entitled to record any conversation to which he was a party." He replaced his glasses, his gaze unwavering. He was present for all recorded conversations. He then pressed play again. The small device emitted a click, and Vanessa flinched, as if physically struck. This time, the setting was Chloe's back-to-school night, only a few months prior. Vanessa's voice, artificially sweet and syrupy, filled the room. "Oh, Miss Lee. Yes, Chloe's grandmother would simply adore to be here," she was heard saying, her tone oozing regret. "But unfortunately, Grandma Eleanor lives quite far away, and she's been having some health problems lately. Nothing serious, mind you, but it keeps her from being as active as she used to be." My mind reeled. Health problems? Lives far away? The audacious lies stunned me. I was in perfect health, healthier than most women my age, and I volunteered at the local animal shelter 3 times a week. I lived a mere 30 minutes drive from their home, a drive I would gladly make 100 times over if it meant seeing my grandchildren. This was not just an exclusion, it was an invention, a carefully crafted narrative designed to paint me as an invalid, conveniently distant, and therefore easily dismissed. Ethan, his face a mixture of shame and confusion, finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "Did you really have to lie?" he whispered, looking at Vanessa, his eyes pleading for an explanation. Vanessa, in the recording, laughed lightly, a chilling, dismissive sound. "Oh, darling, it's not lying, it's managing the situation. You know how nosy some people can be. I just wanted to avoid uncomfortable questions about why Eleanor isn't more involved. It's better for the children this way, Ethan. Less confusion with too many authority figures. We need to present a united front, instill our values." Her recorded voice took on a self-righteous tone. "Besides, Eleanor would only undermine the values we're trying to instill anyway, with all her old-fashioned nonsense. I have come." Ethan, in the present, pressed again, his voice gaining a fragile strength. "What values is she undermining? Exactly, Nola." The recorded Vanessa paused, as if pondering. "Well," she drawled, a smirk evident in her tone. "Values like family dinner every Sunday, respecting your elders, about sacrifice and duty." The irony was so thick it was suffocating. Every value she listed was one she had systematically destroyed in our family. The distant relatives in the room, who had been shifting uncomfortably, now exchanged bewildered glances, their expressions turning from shock to outright condemnation as they stared at Vanessa. Mr. Davies, seizing the moment, pressed the stop button. The sudden silence was deafening. He then looked up, his gaze sweeping across the room, lingering on Vanessa. "There are," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of unassailable truth, 17 more recordings. He held up the small device. "These include various phone calls Frederick was a party to, as well as several instances of footage captured by discrete security cameras he had installed in his home and at strategic points around your property, Ethan, capturing interactions with the children, all within legal parameters." Vanessa, her face now a mottled red, sprung to her feet, overturning her chair with a loud crash. "This is outrageous!" she screamed, her voice cracking with fury. "You can't just spy on people. This is a gross invasion of privacy." Mr. Davies's calm demeanor hardened, his eyes glinting with a steely resolve I hadn't seen before. "Frederick Hayes," he stated, his voice like flint, "believed that privacy should not be a shield for malice and deceit. He intended for everyone in this room, and indeed, anyone who would listen, to know exactly who you are, Mrs. Hayes. The third recording began. A phone call. Vanessa's voice was hushed, conspiratorial, clearly speaking to a friend. Honestly, Barbara, she giggled, a chilling, heartless sound. The old man is really starting to go downhill. I'd give him 2 years, 3 at the outside. He's already showing signs of, forgetfulness. A collective gasp went through the room. Frederick, my Frederick, had always been sharp, lucid, right up until the final, sudden illness. This was a lie, a grotesque fabrication designed to hasten her inheritance. Vanessa's recorded voice continued, laced with a triumphant gloat. He absolutely adores me, you know. He has no idea what I really think about his precious family, his precious traditions. He practically worships the ground I walk on. It's almost too easy. She paused. Then her voice dropped to a chilling whisper, filled with malevolent planning. My plan is to have Eleanor completely isolated by the time he kicks the bucket. A sad old woman everyone feels sorry for, with no one left but her cats. It'll make things so much cleaner when it comes to the inheritance. The words were an icy torrent pouring into the room, revealing the full, horrifying depth of Vanessa's treachery. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about money. It was about destroying me, about isolating me completely, about a calculated, prolonged campaign of emotional torture. Frederick's codicil, his recordings, were not just a defense of his estate. They were his final, desperate act of love, a shield against the darkness that had sought to consume us both. The echo of Vanessa's chilling confession. Her plan to isolate me, her contempt for Frederick, her anticipation of his death, hung heavy in the conference room. It was a silence unlike any other, thick with shock, disgust, and the raw aftermath of exposed malice. No one spoke, no one moved. All eyes were fixed on Vanessa, whose face was now a mask of frantic, cornered fury. Ethan, my son, who had been listening to his wife's recorded voice unravel his family, finally broke the spell. His hands trembled uncontrollably, and tears welled in his eyes, tracking paths down his pale cheeks. His voice, when it came, was a choked whisper. He asked, the hurt in his voice so profound it was almost unbearable. He looked at her, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years, and the adoration in his gaze had finally been replaced by abject horror. Trapped, exposed, and with her meticulously crafted facade utterly shattered, Vanessa's pretense finally dropped completely. The mask of sweet manipulation fell away, revealing the raw, unadulterated venom beneath. She glared at me, her eyes blazing with a hatred so intense it almost made me recoil. Yes, she shrieked, the word tearing through the silence like a banshee's wail. Her voice was shrill, devoid of any pretense of politeness or concern for appearances. Yes, Eleanor, I think you're a pathetic old woman who can't accept that your time is over. Your life is empty, and you just cling to ours like a leech. A collective gasp swept through the room. Ethan's chair, which he had been clutching, fell backward with a crash, startling everyone. The distant relatives, who moments before had been staring in stunned silence, now gasped aloud, their faces a mixture of shock and revulsion. Even Mr. Davies, usually so composed, looked momentarily stunned, his professional facade cracking slightly. Vanessa wasn't finished. The floodgates of her resentment had opened, and a torrent of bitterness poured out. And yes, she continued, her chest heaving, her finger pointed accusingly at me, I admitted to protecting my children from your outdated, suffocating influence, from your endless, boring stories. And yes, I was counting the days until Frederick died, because only then could we truly be free of your suffocating, toxic presence. The room erupted. The gasp turned into murmurs of outrage, whispers of disbelief. Ethan, on his hands and knees beside his overturned chair, buried his face in his hands, his body shaking with sobs. The air was charged with raw emotion, a cacophony of human shock and indignation. Yet, through it all, I remained calm. A strange, serene calm had settled over me. It was not a calmness born of indifference, but of a deep, quiet vindication. For 15 years, I had borne the brunt of her cruelty, her insidious slights, her calculated campaign of isolation. For 15 years, I had questioned my own perceptions, wondered if I was overly sensitive, if I was truly the problem. Now, everyone saw, everyone heard. The truth, in all its ugly, undeniable clarity, was laid bare. My Frederick, in his wisdom and his enduring love, had ensured it. Mr. Davies, regaining his composure, cleared his throat with a commanding sound that cut through the murmurs. He waited for the room to quiet, his gaze firm, his expression stern. "There is more to the codicil," he announced, his voice steady once more. "The recordings, as you heard, were just the first part. Frederick Hayes, having documented the systematic emotional abuse and manipulation perpetrated by Vanessa Hayes, has laid out specific conditions for the distribution of his estate." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "Firstly," he continued, his eyes now sweeping over the room, "regarding the primary residence located at 15 Oakwood Drive, which was initially to be divided equally between Ethan Hayes and Eleanor Morrison." He turned a page in the codicil. "Frederick's revised instruction is that the property, including all furnishings and fixtures, is to be transferred in its entirety to Eleanor Morrison, his beloved wife." Vanessa went utterly white. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking ghostly, her eyes wide with disbelief. She stared at Mr. Davies, then at me, then back at Mr. Davies, as if she hadn't fully comprehended. Then, a primal shriek tore from her throat. "What?" she screamed, her voice hoarse with shock and fury. "That's impossible. Ethan is the son. It should go to him. It belongs to us." Mr. Davies remained unmoved. "Secondly," he announced, his voice cutting through Vanessa's outraged protests, "Frederick Hayes has established an investment portfolio valued at $800,000 for the benefit of his grandchildren, Chloe and Leo Hayes. This sum is to be placed in a trust, administered by Eleanor Morrison, until such time as Chloe and Leo each reach the age of 25. Vanessa's reaction was immediate and visceral. She pounded her fist on the table, her face contorted with avarice. "You can't do this," she screeched, her voice rising to an unbearable pitch. "That money belongs to us. They're just children. They don't need that much. It's our money." Mr. Davies waited for her outburst to subside, his expression grim. Then, he delivered the final, crushing blow. "And thirdly, Mrs. Vanessa Hayes, Frederick Hayes's codicil, states that you are to receive exactly $1. In addition," he added, his voice chillingly precise, "Frederick has compiled an itemized bill for emotional distress and punitive damages amounting to the sum of $2 million, which he intends to pursue through separate legal channels against you, Vanessa Hayes, if necessary, on behalf of Eleanor Morrison and his estate." The $1 and the $2 million bill for emotional distress hung in the air, leaving Vanessa sputtering with speechless rage. Mr. Davies, however, was not finished. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips as he consulted the codicil once more. "However," he continued, his voice regaining its composed cadence, "Frederick, in his boundless generosity, also stipulated that Mrs. Vanessa Hayes may earn additional inheritance through the completion of specific tasks." One of the distant cousins, a man named Blaine, who had been gaping at Vanessa throughout the revelations, finally found his voice. "Tasks? What kind of tasks?" he blurted out, echoing the unspoken question in everyone's mind. Mr. Davies looked directly at Vanessa, his smile broadening ever so slightly. "Task 1. He read, his voice clear and precise. "Mrs. Hayes must personally visit and deliver a written apology to every single individual she knowingly prevented from having a relationship with Chloe and Leo. This apology must be witnessed and notarized by an independent party, acknowledging her malicious intent." "It's something," Vanessa's face crumpled. "That's humiliating," she wailed, clutching her head. "You want me to beg for forgiveness from those busybodies I kept away?" "Never." Unfazed, Mr. Davies continued. "Task 2. Mrs. Hayes must compose a detailed, heartfelt letter to Chloe and Leo, taking full and unequivocal responsibility for Eleanor Morrison's absence from their lives. This letter must explain the deliberate falsehoods she propagated, and must explicitly encourage the children to build a strong, loving relationship with their grandmother, Eleanor. Vanessa slammed her hands on the table, her eyes darting wildly. "I won't do it!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "This is insane. I'm not apologizing to those brats for anything." Mr. Davies simply raised an eyebrow, then read on. Task 3. Mrs. Hayes must volunteer 200 hours at a local senior center, chosen by Eleanor Morrison, wearing a name tag that prominently displays the words, "Learning to respect my elders." A ripple of stifled laughter, quickly followed by choking sounds, swept through the room. I had to bite my lip hard, pressing my fingers into my palm to keep from bursting into a triumphant smile. Frederick. My clever, brilliant Frederick. This was pure, unadulterated genius. Vanessa, however, was past tears. She exploded. "This is ridiculous," she shrieked, her face a fiery red. "I'm not doing any of this. You can't make me. This is torture." But something had shifted in Ethan. He had been listening, truly listening, to every word. His earlier shame and sorrow were slowly being replaced by a dawning realization, a quiet wonder. He looked at me, then back at the codicil in Mr. Davies's hand. "Dad actually planned all this," he murmured, almost to himself, his voice laced with awe. He knew. He actually knew everything. Mr. Davies allowed a moment for the implications of that statement to settle before resuming. Task 4. Mrs. Hayes must attend family therapy sessions with Ethan and the children, with a licensed therapist chosen and approved by Eleanor Morrison, for a minimum duration of 6 months, with all attendance verifiable. This was for Ethan. This was Frederick's last gift to his son, a chance at healing, a pathway back to himself. And finally, Task 5. Mr. Davies announced, his voice imbued with a finality that brooked no argument. Mrs. Hayes must write a public apology, to be published at her own expense, in the local newspaper, acknowledging her mistreatment of Eleanor Morrison and retracting the false statements she made about her character and health. Vanessa stood rigid, her hands clenched into fists, her body vibrating with barely contained fury. The humiliation was immense, and she knew it. "And how much?" she asked, her voice tight with venom. "How much would I get if I completed all these ridiculous, degrading tasks?" Mr. Davies consulted the codicil. $50,000. $50,000? Vanessa shrieked, her voice reaching an almost inhuman pitch. "For all that? That's a pittance. It's an insult." She spun around, her eyes wild, and fixed them on Ethan. Her pleading was desperate, tinged with a terrifying ultimatum. "Ethan, you can't let them do this to me. You're my husband. You have to stop this." Ethan, however, had undergone a profound transformation. The weak, anxious, approval-seeking man I had known for years was gone. His expression, though still pale, was now firm, resolute. His voice, when he spoke, was steady, his gaze unwavering as he met Vanessa's frantic eyes. "Nola," he said, his words slow and deliberate. "For the first time in our marriage, I think I'm seeing exactly who you are. And it's not who I thought you were." One of his contrite, I finally spoke, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the lingering tension. "My husband didn't want revenge, Vanessa," I asserted, looking her directly in the eye. "He wanted truth. He wanted justice. And he wanted to protect his family." Vanessa, defeated but still defiant, glared at us both. "I'll contest it," she spat, her voice laced with malicious intent. "I'll contest this fraudulent will. I'll tie it up in court for years." "Mr." Davies shook his head, a faint, sad smile returning to his lips. "Frederick anticipated that. Mrs. Hayes." The codicil includes notarized affidavits from 3 independent physicians, all certifying his absolute mental competency at the time it was drafted. There is no doubt as to his sound mind. Vanessa's last hope evaporated. Her shoulders slumped for a moment, then she straightened, her eyes hardening into cold, reptilian slits. She looked at Ethan, a chilling warning in her gaze. "Choose carefully, Ethan," she snarled, her voice low and menacing. "Once you side with her, there's no going back." With that, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the conference room, the resounding slam of the door shaking the very foundations of the building. The aftermath of Vanessa's explosive departure from Mr. Davies's office unfolded like an earthquake, leaving devastation in its wake. But also, paradoxically, the chance for new growth. Ethan, my son, returned home that evening, not to the grand house he shared with Vanessa, but to his childhood bedroom in Frederick's, now my, home. He was a shell of himself, distraught and heartbroken. But there was also a glimmer of something new in his eyes. Clarity. A few days later, I overheard a phone call. It was Vanessa, her voice a desperate, calculated whisper, attempting to weave her manipulative web around Ethan once more. She was trying to dismiss the recordings as manipulative and just me venting, painting herself as the victim of Frederick's elaborate scheme. But the Ethan I heard on the phone was no longer the docile, easily swayed man she had controlled for so long. His voice, though weary, was firm. "No, Nola," he said, his words clear and unwavering. "It wasn't just venting. It was you calling my mother pathetic. It was you telling Miss Sown, Lee, that she had health problems and lived far away, when she doesn't. And she lives 30 minutes away. It was you plotting to isolate her and celebrating Dad's impending death." His voice cracked slightly with emotion. "You were suffocating me, Nola. You made me choose between my wife and my mother, and for years, I chose wrong." Frederick's truth had set him free, even if the freedom came at a devastating cost. Later that week, Vanessa, with characteristic audacity, appeared at my doorstep. She stood there, perfectly coiffed, a picture of contrived remorse. "Eleanor," she began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "I know things have been tense. But I think there's been some terrible misunderstandings on both sides. I wanted to apologize." Her eyes, however, were cold and calculating, betraying no genuine emotion. I leaned against the doorframe, my arms crossed, my gaze unwavering. "Which misunderstandings, Vanessa?" I asked, my voice calm. "Which specific lies didn't you mean? The one about my health? The one about my being pathetic? Or the one about you celebrating Frederick's death and plotting my isolation?" Her forced smile faltered, her eyes narrowed. There was no flicker of genuine remorse, no hint of regret. Only a deep-seated resentment that she had been caught. "This is ridiculous," she spat, her veneer of civility crumbling. "You're just enjoying this, aren't you? This cruel little game." "Frederick's tasks," I corrected, my voice firm, "are perfectly designed consequences for your cruelty. They are not a game." Enraged, Vanessa stormed out, her final words echoing in the quiet afternoon. "You think you've won, Eleanor," she snarled over her shoulder. "But your little victory won't last." After she left, I had a long, heartfelt conversation with Ethan. He needed to understand the full extent of Vanessa's manipulation, not just the parts he had heard in the recordings. He listened, his head in his hands, as I recounted years of her carefully orchestrated cruelty, the slow, insidious erosion of our family bonds. He cried, deep, wrenching sobs, grieving for the man he had been, for the mother he had neglected, for the children who now saw me as a stranger. "How do I fix this, Mom?" he asked, his voice raw with despair. "Chloe and Leo, they barely know you. My heart ached for him, for us, for the lost years. We start by undoing the damage. Let's bring Chloe and Leo over, just them, without Vanessa. Let them get to know their grandmother, who I really am." Vanessa, meanwhile, grew increasingly desperate. She made scenes at Ethan's office, demanding to speak to him, threatening to expose him. She barraged his phone with pathetic, pleading voicemails, then angry, accusatory ones. She tried every tactic in her book, but Ethan, fortified by the truth and the pain of his awakening, remained firm. He reiterated his expectation that she complete all 5 of Frederick's tasks, exactly as outlined, if she wanted any chance of reconciliation. The breaking point arrived a week later. I was sitting in my living room when I heard the doorbell. It was Vanessa, holding Chloe and Leo by the hand. Her eyes glittered with a malicious triumph. The children, looking bewildered, clung to her. "Go on, children," Vanessa prompted them, her voice saccharine sweet, but with a hard edge. "Tell Grandma Eleanor what you think." Chloe, coached and clearly uncomfortable, mumbled, "You're trying to take Daddy away." My heart constricted. To use my innocent grandchildren as pawns, to poison their minds further, was the lowest blow yet. I knelt down, trying to meet their eyes. "Chloe, Leo," I said gently, "adults sometimes have disagreements, but that doesn't mean we stop being family. And it certainly doesn't mean we should keep families apart." Just then, Ethan's car pulled into the driveway. He had arrived home early, sensing something was amiss. He saw the scene, saw the coached fear in his children's eyes, and something snapped. He strode over, his face a thundercloud of fury. "Vanessa!" he thundered, his voice raw with anger. "What are you doing? You're traumatizing them." He gently took Chloe and Leo by the hand, leading them towards his car. "Go wait for me in the car, kids. We'll talk." He then turned back to Vanessa, his eyes blazing with a cold, righteous anger. "Pack your things, Nola," he said, his voice deadly calm. "I want you out of the house by tonight. For good." Vanessa's face crumpled one last time, a mixture of shock and sheer malice. Her eyes, filled with hatred, darted to Chloe and Leo, who were watching from the car. "Those children," she spat at Ethan, her voice venomous, "will hate you for breaking up their family. They will hate you for this." Ethan stood frozen, his face a picture of heartbreak. I walked over to him, placing a hand on his arm. "She's wrong, Ethan," I said, my voice soft but firm. "You didn't break up their family. You chose truth over lies. You chose love over manipulation, and that is never something to be hated for." Just then, my phone rang. It was Mr. Davies. "Eleanor," he said, his voice grave, but with a hint of something else, something like relief. "Vanessa just called. She wants to discuss the possibility of completing the tasks." 6 months melted into the past, and the raw wounds of betrayal began to scab over, revealing the resilient skin of healing beneath. I stood in my kitchen, the comforting aroma of roasting chicken filling the air. Chloe, now a bright-eyed 9-year-old, carefully peeled potatoes beside me, while Leo, a boisterous 6-year-old, helped set the table. Sunday dinner, a tradition I had longed for, was finally restored. "Grandma," Chloe said, her voice thoughtful, "why didn't we ever come for Sunday dinner before?" I paused, considering my words. "Well, sweetheart," I said gently, "sometimes grown-ups have different ideas about things. Your mom thought you might need more time just to be kids and have special adventures with her. But your grandpa and I always loved the idea of Sunday dinners, and now we get to do it." It was an age-appropriate truth, sparing them the harsh details of their mother's malice while still acknowledging the past. Vanessa had, indeed, attempted Frederick's tasks, but her inherent nature proved to be her undoing at every turn. Task 1, the apologies to those she had estranged, was a spectacular failure. She'd tried to apologize to Miss Lee, Chloe's second-grade teacher, but when Miss Lee, armed with newfound knowledge, gently confronted Vanessa about the health problem's lie, Vanessa's temper flared. The apology devolved into a bitter accusation, witnessed by a thoroughly uncomfortable notary public. Task 2, the letter to Chloe and Leo, proved equally impossible. She submitted 17 drafts to Mr. Davies, each one a masterclass in deflection, blame-shifting, and passive aggression. Not one contained an ounce of genuine responsibility. Eventually, Mr. Davies returned them all, stating they did not meet Frederick's explicit requirement of taking full, unequivocal responsibility. Task 3, the volunteering at the senior center, was a short-lived disaster. She lasted 6 days at Sunset Manor, constantly complaining about the smell of old people and refusing point-blank to wear the name tag that read, "Learning to respect my elders." She walked out in a fit of pique after a resident asked her to fetch a glass of water, declaring the entire experience degrading. Task 4, the family therapy with Ethan and the children, barely got off the ground. After 2 sessions, Dr. Emily Thorne, the kind and insightful therapist I had chosen, gently but firmly pressed Vanessa on her own actions and their impact. Vanessa, unable to countenance introspection or accountability, stormed out, accusing Dr. Thorne of being biased and incompetent, and Task 5, the public apology, never even began. The idea of publicly admitting wrongdoing, of seeing her name in print associated with such a confession, was a bridge too far for her inflated ego. Her pride, her most defining characteristic, would not allow it. With Vanessa's refusal to complete the tasks, Ethan's resolve solidified. He filed for divorce. To everyone's surprise, the process was swift and remarkably amicable. Vanessa, seemingly only concerned with the monetary aspect, focused solely on the house and the trust for the children, demanding a settlement that included significant portions of the original will that were now unavailable to her. Her attempts to contest the codicil were quickly shut down by Mr. Davies, armed with Frederick's meticulous documentation and the physician's affidavits. Eventually, she accepted a modest settlement, far less than she had anticipated, and vanished from our lives. Though the occasional, bitter email would still appear in Ethan's inbox, Chloe and Leo, shielded as much as possible, slowly began to learn more of the truth. Miss Lee, emboldened by the revealed truth, gently corrected Chloe's understanding of my health problems. Mrs. Albright, a kind neighbor who had seen Vanessa's dismissive behavior, also shared her observations. Ethan, in therapy, learned how to speak to his children about difficult truths in an age-appropriate way. We explained that while adults sometimes have big disagreements, families can still love each other, even if they live in different houses. The new Sunday tradition at my house often involved looking through old photo albums. It was here that Chloe and Leo truly began to discover their grandmother's distant but constant presence in their lives. Pictures of me at their birthday parties, from a distance, or me at school events I had attended despite Vanessa's lies, slowly painted a different picture. One afternoon, Chloe pointed to a photo of me, smiling faintly in the background of her kindergarten graduation. "You were there," she exclaimed, her eyes wide with wonder. "I remember that day. You waved at me." "Yes, I was there," I confirmed, my heart swelling. Chloe, with a child's clear, uncomplicated logic, looked up at me. "More people who love you doesn't make things confusing, Grandma," she declared. "It makes things better." And she was right. My house, which had felt so empty and quiet after Frederick's passing, now felt alive again. It was filled with the sounds of children's laughter, the joyful chaos of building blanket forts, the comforting rhythm of family. My relationship with Ethan had not just healed, it had deepened. He was rediscovering his own judgment, his own worth, becoming the strong, kind man Frederick and I had always known he could be. Chloe and Leo, free from Vanessa's manipulative shadow, were blossoming into the lights of my life, learning about love without conditions or manipulation. Then, Davies called again. Vanessa had formally declined to complete any further tasks. She requested her solitary $1 payment, and, most importantly, she stated she would not interfere with custody or the children's relationship with Ethan and me. She was gone. A year later, the scent of a holiday feast once again filled my kitchen. It was Chloe's 13th birthday, and the house buzzed with life. Chloe, with a mischievous grin, was teaching her new boyfriend Frederick's secret gravy recipe. Leo was arguing good-naturedly with Ethan about who got the last slice of apple pie. And in the living room, Uncle Arthur, a relative Vanessa had purposefully alienated, shared a hearty laugh with a cousin, their relationship beautifully restored. I looked up at Frederick's portrait, hanging proudly in the living room. His kind eyes seemed to twinkle down at me. He had not just left me a house or money, he had left me justice. He had ensured that truth won over lies. He had given me back my family, and in doing so, I had inherited everything that truly mattered.